The sleek black sedan moved carefully through the upscale Washington, D.C. suburb as General Vanessa Harris checked her watch. Despite wearing civilian clothes, her military bearing was unmistakable even seated behind the wheel. She spoke confidently into her car's Bluetooth system while navigating the quiet streets. "Yes, Mr. Secretary, I'll have the strategic assessment on your desk first thing tomorrow," General Harris said, her voice carrying the weight of her 4 stars. "The situation requires immediate attention, and I've assembled a team to analyze the intelligence reports coming in from our assets in the region." The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror caught her by surprise. General Harris had been driving exactly at the speed limit, her car in perfect condition. Nevertheless, she signaled and pulled smoothly to the curb. "Sir, I'll need to call you back. I'm being pulled over," she informed the Secretary of Defense before ending the call. 2 police officers approached her vehicle, their hands resting near their holsters in a way that immediately struck her as excessive. Officer Reynolds, a stocky white man with a crew cut, led the approach while his partner, Officer Matthews, positioned himself by the passenger side. "License and registration," Officer Reynolds demanded without offering a greeting or explanation for the stop. General Harris maintained her composure as she reached slowly for her purse. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" "Just show me your license and registration," Reynolds repeated, his tone hardening. "And keep your hands where I can see them." "I'm reaching for my identification," she explained calmly, her decades of military discipline evident in her measured response. "My registration is in the glove compartment." As she moved to retrieve her documents, Officer Reynolds suddenly yanked the door open. "Step out of the vehicle now," he shouted, drawing his weapon. General Harris froze, her heart racing despite her outward calm. "Officer, I'm complying with your request. There's no need for escalation." Within seconds, she found herself being roughly pulled from her car. Despite her protests and clear attempts to comply, the officers forced her to the ground. The concrete was cold against her cheek as Officer Matthews wrenched her arms behind her back and secured them with handcuffs. "I am General Vanessa Harris, United States Army," she stated clearly, maintaining her dignity despite her position. "I was just on the phone with the Secretary of Defense. This is completely unwarranted." "Sure you were," Officer Reynolds scoffed. "And I'm the president. We've had reports of drug activity in this neighborhood. Your vehicle matches the description." At the police station, General Harris sat handcuffed to a metal chair, her requests to make a phone call repeatedly denied. Her military ID had been dismissed as fake, despite its official Pentagon markings and security features. "I have the right to make a phone call," General Harris stated firmly, her gaze unwavering. "I suggest you allow me to do so immediately." The desk sergeant looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. "You'll get your call when processing is complete." Officer Reynolds smirked from across the room. These people always think there's somebody important. After nearly 2 hours of deliberate delays, General Harris was finally permitted her phone call. Instead of calling a lawyer, she dialed a direct number at the Pentagon. "This is General Harris, authorization code Sierra 9 Delta 47, she spoke clearly into the receiver. "Connect me to SecDef immediately." The officers exchanged glances as General Harris briefly explained her situation to the Secretary of Defense. Their expressions shifted from amusement to concern as they realized their mistake. "Yes, sir. I understand," she concluded. "Thank you." She handed the phone to the desk sergeant. "The Secretary of Defense would like to speak with you." Within 30 minutes, the police station was flooded with military officials and representatives from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. General Harris was immediately released, the handcuffs removed by a profusely apologizing police chief. "General Harris, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry we are for this incident," the police chief stammered. "I assure you this is not how our officers are trained to conduct themselves." General Harris straightened her clothing, her dignity intact despite the ordeal. "This isn't about me, Chief. It's about a systemic problem that needs addressing. Those officers didn't see a general, they saw only the color of my skin." In the following days, the incident sparked national outrage when dashboard camera footage leaked to the media. The officers' body cameras had mysteriously been turned off during the encounter, but the dash cam captured enough of the unjustified detention to cause public fury. Officer Reynolds and Matthews were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The Department of Justice launched a pattern or practice investigation into the police department, uncovering dozens of similar incidents involving racial profiling. 6 weeks later, General Harris testified before a congressional committee investigating police practices and racial profiling. Her uniform gleamed with medals and ribbons earned through decades of distinguished service as she addressed the packed chamber. "I have commanded troops in combat, coordinated multinational military operations, and advised 3 presidents," General Harris stated, her voice steady and powerful. "Yet on American soil, I was thrown to the ground and handcuffed because of assumptions based on the color of my skin." She leaned forward, her gaze sweeping across the committee members. "I do not appear before you seeking personal vindication. I stand here representing countless Americans who face this treatment daily without the benefit of stars on their shoulders or direct lines to the Pentagon." The hearing room fell silent as she continued. "As military leaders, we understand that accountability is not punishment. It is the foundation of improvement. Our police departments deserve the same standard of excellence we demand from our armed forces." A year had passed since General Vanessa Harris found herself face down on the pavement, handcuffed by officers who saw only the color of her skin rather than her 4-star rank. The autumn leaves scattered across the White House lawn as she stood on the podium next to President Mitchell, her dress uniform immaculate, medals and ribbons catching the late afternoon sunlight. This moment represented not just personal vindication, but the culmination of a nationwide movement that had coalesced around her experience, a movement demanding accountability, transparency, and fundamental change in policing across America. The journey to this day had been arduous. General Harris could have easily retreated into the comfort of her Pentagon office after the initial media storm subsided, allowing the incident to fade from public consciousness like so many before it. Instead, she had chosen a different path. "If it can happen to a general," she had told the Secretary of Defense in a private meeting 3 days after the incident, "imagine what happens every day to those without stars on their shoulders or direct lines to Washington." In the months following her detainment, General Harris had methodically channeled her considerable strategic talents toward reform. She assembled a team of military justice experts, civil rights attorneys, community organizers, and progressive police chiefs from across the country. Together, they crafted what would eventually become the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act, legislation that represented the most significant overhaul of law enforcement practices in generations. The president's pen moved deliberately across the document as cameras flashed and recorded the historic moment. The signing ceremony brought together an unlikely coalition. Civil rights leaders stood shoulder to shoulder with police union representatives who had come to recognize that the status quo was untenable. Families who had lost loved ones to police violence watched with tears streaming down their faces, their years of activism finally bearing fruit in concrete policy. Today, we take a significant step toward fulfilling the promise of equal justice under law, President Mitchell declared, his voice resonating through the Rose Garden. This legislation doesn't just change policies, it transforms culture. And we have General Harris to thank for turning a moment of injustice into a movement for change. The Police Accountability and Community Trust Act contained provisions that would have been unimaginable just a year earlier. It established an independent oversight commission with subpoena power to investigate complaints against officers. It mandated comprehensive data collection on stops, searches, and use of force, with results published quarterly for public review. It required body cameras to be active during all civilian interactions, with strict penalties for non-compliance. Perhaps most significantly, it eliminated qualified immunity protections in cases where constitutional rights were clearly violated, ensuring officers could be held personally liable for misconduct. The legislation also allocated substantial funding for training programs designed to address implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and community engagement. This portion of the bill had been General Harris's personal focus, informed by her decades of military leadership experience. In the armed forces, we understand that training creates culture, she had testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee 3 months earlier. We don't simply tell soldiers to respect civilian life and property in conflict zones. We drill these principles into every aspect of their preparation. We simulate challenges, we create muscle memory for restraint, and we establish accountability at every level of command. Our police deserve the same level of training and support. After the signing ceremony, General Harris descended from the podium to embrace Marissa Taylor, the mother of a young man killed by police in Detroit 5 years earlier. The two women had formed an unlikely alliance during the legislative process, with Marissa bringing the raw emotional testimony of her loss, while General Harris provided the strategic expertise to navigate Washington's political labyrinth. "This won't bring David back," Marissa whispered, her voice breaking as she held tightly to the general. "But maybe it means no other mother will get that call." "This is just the beginning," General Harris assured her, the cameras capturing this poignant moment between two women united by a common cause, despite their vastly different backgrounds. As for Officers Reynolds and Matthews, their paths following the incident with General Harris had diverged significantly. The Internal Affairs investigation had uncovered a troubling pattern in Officer Reynolds's history: multiple complaints of excessive force and racial bias that had been systematically buried within the department. Forensic analysis of his body camera revealed that he had deliberately deactivated it before approaching General Harris's vehicle, and subsequent examination of his personal devices discovered text messages containing racial slurs and discussions about targeting drivers in the predominantly white neighborhood who didn't belong. Reynolds now faced criminal charges for civil rights violations, falsifying police reports, and obstruction of justice. His trial was scheduled for the following month, with federal prosecutors presenting evidence that would likely result in significant prison time. The case had become emblematic of the system's failure to identify and remove problematic officers before they caused irreparable harm. Officer Matthews, while terminated from the force, had followed a different trajectory. The investigation found that while he had participated in the improper detention, he had done so under the senior officer's direction and had attempted to intervene when Reynolds became unnecessarily aggressive. In the aftermath, Matthews had become an unexpected advocate for reform, speaking candidly about the culture of silence that pervaded his former department and the implicit pressures to support fellow officers regardless of their conduct. "I failed that day," Matthews admitted in a television interview that had gone viral. "I failed General Harris. I failed my oath to protect and serve, and I failed myself. I was more concerned with backing my partner than with doing what was right. That's the culture we need to change." Matthews had since begun working with police academies across the country, sharing his experience as a cautionary tale and helping to develop new training protocols that emphasized ethical decision-making under pressure. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and work toward redemption offered a template for other officers seeking to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. 3 months after the White House signing ceremony, General Harris stood before a different audience in the gymnasium of the newly established National Center for Police Excellence. The facility, located on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., represented the most innovative aspect of the new legislation: a training center modeled after military leadership academies, but dedicated to law enforcement. Here, Police executives from departments nationwide would undergo intensive 6-week programs designed to transform their approach to public safety. The military and law enforcement share a fundamental mission, General Harris explained to the inaugural class of 100 police chiefs and command staff from across the country. We are both entrusted with the authority to use force in defense of others. But with that authority comes an awesome responsibility to exercise restraint, to protect the innocent, and to earn the trust of those we serve through our actions every single day. The center's curriculum drew heavily from military training methodology, but adapted for civilian law enforcement contexts. Scenario-based exercises placed officers in high-stress situations where they had to make split-second decisions with imperfect information. Virtual reality simulations helped identify implicit biases by tracking eye movements and response patterns. Community engagement practicums paired officers with local residents for collaborative problem-solving projects. Each element was designed to build not just tactical skills but ethical judgment. General Harris moved through the facility with purpose, stopping occasionally to observe training sessions or engage with participants. The center represented her vision for transforming police culture from the top down, recognizing that meaningful change required leadership commitment at every level. When I was detained that night, she confided to a small group of police chiefs during an informal lunch discussion, I wasn't thinking about my own humiliation. I was thinking about all the people who experienced the same treatment without my resources or platform. What haunted me wasn't the handcuffs. It was knowing that for so many Americans, that interaction could have ended tragically. The chiefs listened intently, many of them initially skeptical about the program but increasingly receptive to her perspective. One chief from a major Midwestern city spoke up, his voice reflective. "We've been trained to see threats everywhere," he acknowledged. "To approach every situation assuming the worst. It keeps officers alive, but it destroys community trust. Finding that balance. That's the challenge we've never properly addressed." General Harris nodded. "In military operations, we understand that mission success often depends more on earning civilian trust than on tactical superiority. The same principle applies to domestic policing. Safety isn't just about rapid response times or arrest statistics. It's about creating environments where cooperation replaces fear." As the year anniversary of her detention approached, General Harris found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant. Police departments undergoing federal consent decrees sought her expertise in organizational transformation. Civil rights organizations invited her to help bridge divides between activists and law enforcement. International delegations studied the model she had developed for potential adaptation to their own contexts. The most meaningful initiative, however, was barely visible to the public. General Harris had established a confidential support network for officers of color who faced discrimination within their departments. These men and women often served as informal community liaisons while simultaneously enduring racist comments and systemic barriers to advancement within their own ranks. The network provided legal resources, psychological support, and strategic guidance for navigating hostile work environments while advocating for change from within. "What happened to me was public and dramatic," General Harris told one group during their monthly virtual meeting. "But what many of you face is relentless and invisible, the daily cuts that bleed your spirit and challenge your commitment to service. Your resilience in the face of that reality is nothing short of heroic." On the exact 1-year anniversary of her detention, General Harris returned to the suburb where it had occurred. The police department had undergone a complete overhaul under new leadership committed to implementing the reforms now required by federal law. She had been invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for a new class of officers, a diverse group that reflected the changing face of American law enforcement. As she addressed these young officers preparing to take their oath, General Harris reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. 1 year ago, on this very street, I experienced firsthand what happens when the immense power of the badge becomes disconnected from its purpose, she told them, her voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. Today, I'm not here to dwell on that moment, but to celebrate what has grown from it. A renewed commitment to justice that is neither blind to difference nor defined by it. She looked out at the graduating class, seeing in their faces the future of policing in America. The uniform you will wear carries both privilege and burden. It grants you authority few others possess and demands from you integrity that few others must demonstrate. When you encounter someone who looks different from you, who speaks differently or lives differently, remember this. Your power is not diminished by treating them with dignity. It is fulfilled by it. As the new officers rose to take their oath, General Harris stood at attention, her military bearing undiminished by time or circumstance. The path to true reform remained long and uncertain, but in this moment, watching these diverse faces pledge themselves to public service, she allowed herself to feel something that had been absent during much of the past year's struggle: hope.